In a recent theory video discussing the recurrence of moon symbolism and what these motifs may reveal about Oda's thematic intent, I briefly discussed the idea that the red line was an artificial creation. I would like to expand further on this idea and speculate what this may imply about the Void Century for the endgame of the series. I believe both the red line and the grand line may have been artificially created during the Void Century. On the opening page of chapter 994, we see a wide-shot panel of the roof of Onigashima where Kaido, in dragon form, is fighting Odin's 9 retainers, from which we can gain an appreciation for the utterly massive scale of the Skull Dome. From the moment the Straw Hats arrived on Onigashima, the resemblance between the Skull Dome to the ancient giant zombie ores was evident. What remains uncertain is whether the skull of Onigashima is a mountain carved to resemble an ancient giant, or if Kaido's castle was built into the skeletal remains of a once-living creature. If the skull was actually once a living ancient or supergiant, ores would be tiny by comparison. This makes me wonder if the legend of the continent puller derives from the being to whom the skull of Onigashima belonged, rather than the zombie the Straw Hats fought on Thriller Bark. A connection between ores and Onigashima would certainly make a lot of sense. It's really interesting to see how many elements of the current story saga were introduced during the Thriller Bark arc. Kaido and Wano were first mentioned, Big Mom's daughter Lola and Samurai Ryuma were introduced, as was ores. I believe the proximity with which ideas, concepts, or characters are introduced into the story may indicate those which are interrelated. Of course, everything in One Piece is connected to some extent, but it makes sense that ideas which were imagined together might make their way into the narrative around the same time. In the current story saga, there have been many references to ores, but it's unclear at this point how they're all connected. Kaido's horns and the Onigashima skull strongly resemble ores. The horned skull emblem on the gate of Punk Hazard also resembles ores. We know that the numbers were failed experiments from Punk Hazard, and that the world government is attempting to resurrect the super or ancient giants, but we do not yet know for what purpose. We also do not yet know how these super giants relate to the warriors of Elbaf. In another recent video, I discussed the idea that all of the dreams of the Straw Hats are interrelated, with strong connection to the Void Century and the central narrative arc of the series. In this video, I brought up the idea that the Red Line, the massive supercontinent which encircles the One Piece world, is an aberration, or an artificial creation. Nami's dream of mapping the world, Brook's dream of reuniting with Laboon, and Sanji's dream of discovering the All Blue can only really be accomplished when the wall dividing the world seas crumbles. I believe it is very likely the Red Line was created during the Void Century. In the One Piece world, the Red Line is a geographical anomaly. At its peak, the Red Line extends 10 kilometers above the ocean, and is the only massive continent of its type. It consists of multiple different climate zones, which implies it may have been assembled by connecting many distinct islands. Laboon followed Brook's crew into the Grand Line and is covered in scars from ramming repeatedly against the Red Line. Yet in chapter 654 we see an entire gang of island whales draped in scars, indicating this behavior is common to Laboon's species rather than unique to Laboon, which further indicates the separation of the world's seas is unnatural. The Holy City, the capital of the world government, is located on the Red Line where the Eve Tree grows directly above Fishman Island. At this point, the Red Line and the Grand Line intersect. Pangea Castle, in which the Five Elders and Lord Emu reside, takes its name from the real-world supercontinent broken apart many eons ago through the movement of tectonic plates. Interestingly, we see the same emblem inside Emu's vault, as was seen on the clothing of zombie Ores, the continent puller, during Thriller Bark. The Onigashima skull's location on Wano is very interesting because, like the Red Line, Wano also has many wildly different climate zones, which indicates it too may have been assembled or pieced together. The ores the Straw Hats battled on Thriller Bark was large, but the epitaph continent puller always seemed to be hyperbolic. The giant to whom the skull of Onigashima belonged, however, might live up to that reputation. What could this then mean? Well, if the ancient giants were once as massive as this creature, which left behind the skull on Onigashima, their utility to the world government is readily apparent. But what role might they have played in history? The name of Pangea Castle, the emblem on Ore's clothing, and the structure of the Red Line together begin to paint a picture. That the ancient giants, perhaps during the Void Century, were responsible for the construction of the Red Line, and that this work was done at the behest of the world government or the forces which now hold power. Perhaps even earlier in history, they were responsible for the creation of the land of Wano. So if the Red Line is artificially created, what then of the Grand Line? The only way to reach Laugh Tale, the final island where One Piece is hidden, is to sail the Grand Line, which can only be traveled in one direction because it is hemmed in by the calm belts, windless stretches of ocean in which the Sea Kings, sea creatures of immense scale, reside. We know these creatures to be sentient beings who wait for a promised day when the world will be set right. In chapter 968, Roger and Odin hear the voice of the Sea Kings who speak of the day when the two sovereigns shall meet. The Sea Kings proclaim that even the whales cry out in anticipation of this promised day, which introduces perhaps an intentional allusion to Laboon and the island whales separated by the red line. The ability to hear the voice of these massive creatures is referred to by Rayleigh as the voice of all things, a power we also know Luffy and Momonosuke possess. The ancient weapon Poseidon is the name given to the mermaid princess who possesses the ability to communicate with and command the Sea Kings, a power Roger believed would be essential to someday challenge the world, which was shown in chapter 968 to be a deciding factor in Roger disbanding his crew, leaving the task of bringing the New Dawn to his successor. We also know that One Piece was left behind by Joy Boy 800 years ago to fulfill a specific purpose, that those who crafted and protect the road poneglyphs needed to reach Laugh Tale share these prophecies with the Sea Kings. We know that discovery of One Piece will lead to a global war, and that the one who inherits the treasure will also inherit the will of Joy Boy and Roger to bring the light of the New Dawn to the world. It's almost as if the Grand Line itself is a gauntlet, a crucible intentionally crafted to forge his successor by necessitating full circumnavigation of the globe, bringing any contender to inherit the treasure into contact with many peoples in the world's most dangerous seas. Mihawk refers to Luffy's greatest strength during the Battle of Marineford as his ability to make friends or allies of anyone he meets. We see this trait has been essential in guiding the Straw Hats' path toward One Piece. It is only through befriending the Minks and the Samurai that the Straw Hats are now poised to possess 3 of the 4 keys needed to reach the final island. And it was their unwavering faith in Robin, their friend, which was strong enough to inspire a willingness to stand up to the world and its darkness, which has given them a means to decipher these ancient writings. This leads me to believe the path to One Piece is designed as a system to winnow competition, and select the right heir to Roger and Joy Boy's will at the right time. The Grand Line and Red Line intersect at 2 points. The Holy Land Marijwa, where the Eve Tree grows and Fisherman Island is located, marks the transition point between Paradise and the New World. On the opposite side of the One Piece globe, Reverse Mountain is the entry point into the Grand Line. Presumably, Laugh Tale is close to the end of the line. The treasure is thus found where X marks the spot. 800 years ago, at the end of the Void Century, the world government rose to power. We don't yet know the details of what transpired in the war which precedes the current epoch of history. But we do know 20 kings banded together to oppose the growing power of an ancient civilization which possessed tremendous technological prowess. I believe there's a strong possibility that during this conflict the Grand Line and Red Line came into being, created by diametrically opposed forces. As I discussed, I believe the Grand Line exists to protect the way to One Piece, the key to upending the world order. The final island can only be reached by one like Luffy or Roger, guided across the sea through the long dark night by fate and a belief in impossible dreams, able to make friends wherever they go. We know Joy Boy is the one responsible for leaving One Piece behind. It may be assumed that those who created and protect the poneglyphs were his allies, friends scattered across the sea waiting for a promised day when the world will be set right. The Sea Kings allude to a past failure but say surely all will go well this time. These massive sea creatures which inhabit the Calm Belts play an instrumental role in protecting One Piece and preserving the structure of the Grand Line. Perhaps the supergiants, or more specifically the beings to whom the Skull Dome of Onigashima belonged, the original continent pullers, were responsible for creating the Red Line. But to what end? The division of the world's seas may be instrumental in suppressing freedom on a global scale. We also see the world government has been hard at work for centuries building Tequila Wolf, a massive bridge in the East Blue. The purpose for this structure is not yet known. Perhaps the fact that the Red Line encircles the entire globe implies a desire to reach a certain destination, and also an inability to cross the sea. Perhaps then Tequila Wolf represents an extension of that desire, and in the absence of Onigashima-sized ancient giants, thousands have been enslaved by the world government as they work towards this goal. Could this then mean that the experiments to resurrect the ancient giants have a greater significance to the central narrative arc of the series than was at first apparent? Of course, this is all speculation, but as the story draws closer to Laugh Tale, the answers to the deepest mysteries in One Piece will soon be revealed. What do you think about the origins of the Grand Line and the Red Line? Is there a connection between Onigashima and the legend of the Continent Puller Oars? Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a like. If you want to be notified when future videos are posted, please consider subscribing and hit the bell icon. Most important, let me know your thoughts down in the comments.